Cold enough for you? I must have heard that about 5 times this morning, both at morning prayer and then later when people were coming in for Mass. The deacon was telling me that in his car, the temperature registered as 14 below as he drove over here this morning. Cold, cold. It seems like the earth is gripped in the death of cold. You know, we look outside and we see a blanket of snow, more snow than we've seen in years. And everything is dead. Everything is held in the grip of death. There is no life. It almost seems as if it's over. And then you and I gather here tonight and we begin the season of Lent. And the word Lent comes from Old English or Old German or Old Dutch, depending on which one you want to choose. And it means spring. Really? Spring? Yeah, where would they get that idea? But Ash Wednesday is set not because we've actually hit spring, but it's set because we celebrate Easter on the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the spring equinox. You got that, right? Yeah. But that's when we celebrate it, and so now we move 40 days backward and establish when we begin spring. And it really doesn't matter what's happening outside. It always matters what's happening inside. And that's the invitation of Lent, is to let spring come inside of us. And you and I know what spring is like. You know, in just a little while, it won't be all that much longer, those of us who are older, who have lived long enough to see springs and summers and falls and winters, we know what's coming. Soon the snow will melt enough, and then we'll see these crocuses coming through, even in shallow snow. Flowers will bloom and announce the beginning of springtime. It will be a wonderful thing that all of a sudden, all that seems so dead, so lifeless, will come to life. But that's what we hope comes within us during the season of Lent. That's the invitation of Lent. To open ourselves up and to become more and more those people that we know we actually could be. You know, to become the person your daughter thinks you are. To become what you know you could be, what I know I could be, what God knows we could be. To become more of that. That's what the season of Lent is about growing in this life of Christ, growing toward Easter, because that's our goal, my sisters and brothers. Because even though we start this in the depth of winter, even though we started on what I hope is the coldest day in the year, even though we start it now, we know that in 40 days, the sun will rise and the glory of God will be revealed. That's our journey, is to that day of glory, that day of resurrection, that day when the sun rises from the dead and life conquers again. That's our goal. And so the Lord invites us to spend these 40 days by doing what are 3 things that are part of the Christian life: fasting, prayer, and works of charity. He talked about those in the gospel and called us to do that, not in a way that is publicized to everyone, but one that really opens ourselves up. He talks about fasting, which is giving up. You know, whatever it is I need to give up. Is it food? Maybe, but it might be something else. It might be something else that is destructive in my life, or a way that I waste time. Giving up some of that, or all of that, depending on what it is, to give it up. But you know, if we give it up, we got to do more than just give it up. You know, I remember when I was in St. Agnes in Flint in 5th grade, there was a woman in the cafeteria that kind of caught on that during Lent I wasn't taking desserts. And so all through Easter, she gave me double desserts. Really? So what kind of penance was that? Not much, but I loved it. I loved her. I thought that was great. But, it's giving up, but more importantly than giving away whatever it is that I've given up, to make sure that someone else, someone who has less, someone who has need, benefits from what I give up. That's the important thing, is that somehow what we give up should be shared with those who have a greater need for it than I do, so that their lives are made better by whatever I gave up. If it's time, use that time to reach out to others in a way that will help end loneliness that's so prevalent, not just because of the pandemic, but just because of this time of year when people stay home more. That really could use some human contact, some knowledge that they are cared for. Whatever it is, to give it away, to make sure that someone who has less benefits. And then ultimately, my sisters and brothers, we're invited to give in, to give up, to give away, and to give in to God. Give in to God in a way that recognizes the presence of God who's with me all the time. And that's an important thing. It isn't that somehow, I remember back years ago, they would say, let us be aware that we are now in the presence of God. And it always struck me, I thought, well, aren't we always in the presence of God? Is it just because I'm aware of that? Or is God always present? And I think it's that. That's the greater truth. But am I always aware of that? I remember years ago, even well before I was ordained, I was in church and I was sitting in a pew, and about 2/3 of the way back, and this family came in with a little kid, and you know how it is. One of the parents was holding the child. I don't remember whether it was male or female, either one, but I remember that child, and you know what happens when you're sitting behind a little kid. They're working and then you try and get their attention, You make a face at them. You try and connect with them. And I was doing that, And then all of a sudden, it struck me. I heard God say to me, Dave, that's like you. That's what you do all the time. You're looking around everywhere. You're totally unaware of the fact that I hold you always in my embrace. That I have you always in my arms. I care for you always. But I'm not aware. Lent is a time to give in, my sisters and brothers, to give in to that awareness of God's presence, to become more aware of that and to make it more and more a part of who we are as believers. Lent is a journey through a desert of 40 days, a desert that we make for ourselves, that we simplify our lives by giving up and giving away and by giving in. It is by those three practices, however we practice them, through those three practices that we open the door of holiness during Lent. That you and I are invited to enter into this journey with the Lord, to do it with Him and through Him and in Him. To make this journey for 40 days, to become more and more the person that we know we could be, and allow God to work the miracle of His grace within us. That's the invitation of Lent. And that's how we start. And so we'll start by marking ourselves with ashes as our determination to turn away from sin and be faithful to the gospel that we've known for years. To be a little more faithful to that in a way that will help me come to Easter and rise with the Lord a better person than I entered the season of Lent. It doesn't have to be greatly. It doesn't have to be any great things, but it is that consistent practice of giving up and giving away and giving in that enables me to become more and more. That in the midst of the coldest days in the year, you and I begin to celebrate spring. Not so much out there, but hopefully in here. That new life that has begun this day will continue to grow until we reach its fullness. Lent after Lent after Lent, to make this journey with the Lord so that we can grow to become truly His own. That's the invitation of Lent. And so I wish you a happy Lent. And I hope that our journey together during these 40 days will increase the life of Christ in us all, so that Easter will rise with the sun.